In this video, I'll show you the uncomplicated way to make a beautiful, successful sourdough loaf. The important things for successful sourdough is your starter. You have to have strong starter. If you don't have that, it's not going to work. So you have to work on developing a strong starter. The other is structure. It seems as though perhaps the stretch and folds aren't necessary, and I have tried it without doing it, but I have found that the stretch and folds give it that structure. So I do stick with that method, and I will do that for 4 times. I think it's very effective. Another important thing is the dough temperature. Your dough has to be between 78 and 82 degrees during bulk fermentation. If it doesn't get to that temperature, it won't ferment properly, or it will take too long if it's below that temperature, or it'll bulk ferment and overproof if it's over 82 degrees. So you must take your dough temperature and keep an eye on it. And the final step is shaping and proofing. You have to shape the dough. The banneton is very important to keep the dough in the shape for baking so it doesn't turn into a blob. And proofing, once it's shaped in the banneton, is important, and you have to keep an eye on that with the touch method as I showed in the video. You have to do that poke test so that you know when your dough is ready to go into the refrigerator. If you let it go too far, you won't get this oven spring when it goes into the oven, and you need the oven spring to create this beautiful loaf. I've been doing this consistently for about 2.5 years. There have been a lot of trial and error, but within the last year, I have had good success. A few challenges when it's extremely warm and when I lose track of time and I have over-fermented dough. But those have been good learning experiences to see what over-fermented dough looks like and how to avoid that. Here's my process. I use my starter out of the refrigerator. It hasn't been fed in the past few days. I've been doing this method for several months and it has been working out great to speed the process. I take the starter out of the refrigerator about an hour or so before I'm going to prepare the dough so that it is soft. I have 2 jars because I keep 2 jars of active starter. I find it easier than having 1 large jar. Start with 350 grams of warm filtered tap water. So I take a little bit of starter from each, and I'm using 150 grams of starter. You can see that the starter is soft and pliable. I will feed both of these starters after this step. I mix the starter and the water until the starter is dissolved. The starter's dissolved. I like to use a little bit of whole wheat and bread flour. I will use up to 100 grams of whole wheat flour, typically when I'm making my standard loaf. I usually just put in a couple scoops. It doesn't have to be exact on that. I just try to keep it under 100 grams. Bread flour, I will add bread flour until we get to 500 grams total flour. I stir until combined and all of the flour is hydrated. I don't love getting my hands covered with dough, so I use the stick and this plastic scraper. You can certainly use your hands if you don't mind sticky dough. I fold the dough until the flour is incorporated. You can see the dough is shaggy, but all of the flour is hydrated with the water. Now I'm going to set this aside for an hour to let this dough rest. And I use a heated mat. This is a waterproof pet bed, and I've had this several years, so the control may be different than what you find today. I have it set on high because it is cooler weather now. I am putting my dough inside my plastic cake dome. This warms up nice. It creates a nice warm environment, keeps the dough wet without using towels or plastic wrap. Going to feed the starter. On a standard feeding, I use a half a cup of flour and a quarter cup of water. The important thing is consistency. When you stir it, you want it to be pasty. It shouldn't be too liquidy. If it's too stiff, add more water. If it's too liquidy, add more flour. I wet my silicone spatula and I go down the sides of the jar. I have a separate video on maintaining starter, which I will link in the description. I put the lid on tight and I set both jars onto the heat mat, and these will double in size within the next 2 hours. And then at that point, I'll put into the fridge for the next use. I use this cake dome because I had it and it fits perfectly over the size bowl that I like to use. Here are other ways that you can create a nice moist environment for your dough to bulk ferment. This is a smaller glass bowl, and I have a glass cake dome that fits over this. So this would be the same principle. Just make sure it's all flush on the surface on the bottom. And this can be on a heat mat. If you don't have a glass dome, you could use a plate, either this way or upside down so your dough has room. But this creates that airtight environment without a towel or plastic wrap. You could also cover this with a large bowl. So see what you have. I just like to leave this here. This is on my counter all the time because I make bread at least once a week. It's been an hour for the autolyse phase, which is flour and water starter. And now I'm going to add salt and additional water. The dough is very stiff in this phase. Let's see how stiff it is. I like to make a little area here where I pour the salt in, 10 grams of salt, 20 grams of water. And I let that water moisten that salt. I'm kneading it, so to speak, just to get the salt combined and that additional water mixed in. I'm simply going to make it a round ball. Here's the dough. It's rounded. This is going to go onto the heated mat. I'm going to cover it. And then after 30 minutes for the first stretch and fold, we'll check the temperature and we'll talk about the importance of dough temperature. What I've learned is I set a timer on my phone for every 30 minutes for 2 hours. And that reminds me to come back to check the dough. As I mentioned earlier, I said I had a few times where I've over fermented the dough. It's because I was outside in the garden doing other things and completely forgot that I was doing dough. So now I set the timer on my phone for 30 minutes. I can go off and do stuff when I'm going to be around the house or in the gardens. And then I just come back and do the stretch and folds for the 30 minutes. And then also at bulk fermentation, I have made the mistake of totally forgetting that I was doing bread because I was outside. It was a beautiful evening. And then when I came in, I saw my dough and it was over fermented. So a timer on that helps as well. The dough is smooth and glossy. It already has some bubbles forming. This is the first stretch and fold. The dough will still be stiff. Wet your hand. You can see how it is stretching nicely. But as you get to the fourth, it's not as stretched. And don't force it. What I like to do is I'll just fold it back and I make it into a ball. I tuck it under, I go around. And the dough does feel wet, which is nice. That's what I'm going for. I do a little bit of resistance because I want a rounded dough ball. This is the other important step. You have to take the dough temperature because that is going to tell you where you are. My dough temperature is currently at 74. That is too cool. I want it between 78 and 82. And that's why the heated mat is so critical this time of year. I have this set on high. This dough temperature will rise the longer that it is on the mat, but this is the first round. We'll test the temperature at each stretch and fold in the 30-minute intervals. And if it's extremely chilly or breezy, I will cover this dome with a thick towel. It can be much cooler here on the outside wall than it would be if it was in the center of the room. So keep an eye on that. If it feels cool, put a towel on it. And don't forget to set your timer for 30 minutes so you don't forget to come back. It's been another 30 minutes. Bubbles are forming. I can tell it's coming up. So stretch and fold. Wet my hand. It's a little softer, a little more stretchy and forgiving. But as you can see, that third fold, it is still a little stiff. I don't want to force it. So I just put it down in the bowl. And like I keep saying, I roll it. This is the way I do it. Taking the temperature again. Okay, it's up to 76, so it's warming up. But by the time we're done with the stretch and folds, I'd really like this to be at 80 degrees. Back into the heating. Don't forget to set your timer for 30 more minutes. We have some nice bubbles here on the surface. 77 degrees. Back into the heat, back in 30 minutes for the last stretch and fold. A reminder to set the timer. This is the last stretch and fold, and it's been 2 hours. Here's how the dough looks. It has some nice activity forming. Now we're ready for bulk fermentation. Taking the temperature, we're back down to 76. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a heavy towel over my dome, and this will warm up. And we will check back in about an hour to see the progress. The starter looks pretty good. I'm going to leave it here for a little bit, and then I'm going to put it in the refrigerator. It's been an hour and a half. The starter is ready to go into the fridge. As the seasons change, the temperature is going to change, which is going to affect your bulk fermentation time. This is taking a little bit longer today because it is quite cold. And again, I said this is on an outside wall. I put a towel here. But we're going to look at the dough, see where we're at. It has risen. It's doing very well. It has some nice bubbling going on. It's up to 80, which is great. That's perfect. 79 to 82 is perfect. I think this needs to sit for another hour in the heat before it gets a little bit larger. But I am going to keep an eye on it because I've learned you don't want to go too far with the bulk fermentation because it's still going to ferment after you shape it and put it into the banneton. So let's look back in about 30 minutes. This goes in the fridge. We'll check back in 30 minutes. Here's the dough. It has grown quite a bit. What I look for is a rounded edge at the side of the bowl. I want it to have like a little bit of a dome shape. I pull it back and you can see it's coming away from the bowl easily. So to me, this is a good time to take it out of the bowl and do the pre-shape. I just use my finger to nudge it out. It will come out on its own, but I'm just speeding the process. So I'm just pulling it into a tight ball. Doing the resistance. And it takes shape nicely. I'm going to let this rest for about 20 minutes under a towel. I prepare the banneton with rice flour. And you use rice flour because the dough will not stick to the rice flour. This allows the dough to be in here and it comes out smoothly and you're ready to bake. I just do this and it's ready to go. But you must rinse your hand. You don't want the rice flour on your hands for when you're doing your final shaping. The dough has rested. It looks beautiful. This is the dry side. So we flip it over, stretch it out. I like to let it rest that seam side down, and I pinch together the ends. And I'll let that rest for a minute or two. The dough has rested. I like to just give it a little tension. Put it upside down in the banneton. Pinch it together. I like to make it tight. I like to round out the ends. Pinch it together. Round down the ends. I'd like a nice oval shape. Put some more rice flour on top. And Now is where we're going to still be doing some more fermentation and proofing. See, I put my finger in and it bounces back quickly. That means it needs more time in the warm temperature to proof. So what I'm going to do, I have my heat pad on low over here. I put the Banneton in just like that and I cover it, and then I leave it in there 30 to 40 minutes and I check on it to check the proof again before it goes into the refrigerator. I checked the dough and it is ready to go in the fridge. And how I know that is I press on it and the dough, I press on it and the fingerprint stays in there but slowly releases. If this was overproofed, if I put my finger in there, that dent would stay way down there, and that's not a great sign. So this is why you really have to pay attention once you get the dough in the Banneton. So just to refresh, see, it bounces back, still leaves a slight indent. That means the gluten structure is still good and hasn't totally broken. Now what I do is I just like to cover this with a towel and I put it in a Ziploc bag and it goes in the fridge overnight. And then we're going to bake this in the morning. The next day is the perfect time to bake the bread. Look how beautiful that looks. It already has the rice flour on the bottom. Take it out of the Banneton and I spread the rice flour around. My oven has preheated at 500 degrees with the Dutch oven inside. I add a round wire rack to the bottom of my Dutch oven, and that keeps this baking silpat off of the bottom. It keeps the bread from over baking on the bottom. So now I'm going to score it. I simply just go straight across. You can make designs, and I've done that, but for this exercise, I'm just going straight across. And I go a couple times, and then I like to turn the blade on an angle and get underneath that dry outer layer. I find it helps the bread open easier. Putting the blade at an angle, it separates the inside moist dough from this dry outer layer, and it creates a nice opening down the center. Bake at 500 for 20 minutes. This is always the moment of truth. It's always fingers crossed. Oh, look at that. See, it's beautiful. Back in the oven, uncovered for 20 minutes. There's the beautiful bread. Beautiful color all around. It's always rewarding when it comes out as you planned. I'm going to let it rest here on the wire rack. This is the wire rack I use inside the Dutch oven. This one happens to be a vintage one, but you can buy them new. So I highly recommend a wire rack on the bottom to keep your bread from being overcooked. We'll let this rest for about an hour and then we'll cut it open and see how it looks on the inside. This is my final baked loaf. It has beautiful color all around. The bread has rested for well over an hour, and that's the ideal time to cut it. You want the bread to be completely cooled on the inside before cutting into it. Normally, if I was cutting this for daily use, I would start at the end. But since we want to see the full crumb, I'm going to cut it in half. Look at that. It is perfect. Everybody likes to show that it's squishy. It's just delightful. Take a look at that. It's beautiful. Those are the takeaways: your starter, your structure, your dough temperature, and your shaping and final proofing. So good luck. I have links in the description for the recipes for sourdough, simplified, same-day sourdough, other videos in my kitchen playlist, which highlights all the ways that I use sourdough and different methods for cooking. I encourage you to be patient, keep an eye on the temperature and the proofing, and you too will have success with sourdough. Check out the kitchen playlist for more stuff that's happening in the kitchen. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.